Unhealed pain is not a dormant weight within us. It is alive, intelligent, and relentless in its pursuit of recognition. It does not fade quietly into the background of our lives, waiting for us to outgrow it or forget. No, it evolves. It takes shape in our relationships, our choices, our recurring misfortunes. It recreates the very conditions in which it was born, not because it wishes to harm us, but because it longs to be seen. Emotional pain, left unacknowledged, becomes the architect of our inner world. It designs the blueprint for our behaviors and then hands us the same script to rehearse again and again until we finally turn around and listen. Many believe they are cursed by fate. Why do I always attract the same kind of person? Why does this always happen to me? These questions, so often asked in moments of despair, are not expressions of weakness. They are whispers from the unconscious, pleading for awareness. When we begin to look closer, we discover that life is not punishing us. It is mirroring us, not as a cruel game, but as a sacred opportunity to finish what was once interrupted. Take, for example, the child who grows up emotionally neglected, not overtly abused, but simply unseen, left alone in their inner world, their needs unacknowledged, in their unconsciousness, regarded so inherently that they seem insanely beautiful. When we do this, we still see and ignore, and this weights the same soul as our century. These are unseen moments, unknown, unfed, selfish, and unrefined, to be fed and unfed, not to be fed and unrefined, to be fed, their emotional expressions dismissed or misunderstood. Such a child does not grow up understanding their pain. They grow up adapting around it. They become the pleaser, the achiever, the invisible one, the perfect one. And yet the wound remains, a deep hunger to be fully known and accepted. As adults, they may find themselves drawn to partners who are distant, avoidant, or emotionally unavailable, not because they are broken or foolish, but because the psyche is attempting to return to the scene of the wound. It seeks unconsciously to recreate the original conditions in hopes of rewriting the ending. This time, maybe they will be chosen. This time, maybe they will be seen. But here lies the great trap. Until the wound is made conscious, the pattern continues. The more we ignore it, the louder it gets. The psyche has no interest in convenience or comfort. It is interested in wholeness. And wholeness cannot be achieved by bypassing pain. It must be walked through, felt fully, embraced like a long-lost child. Only then does the cycle begin to unravel. We are taught, often from a young age, to fear our emotions. Anger is dangerous. Sadness is weakness. Fear is failure. So we repress. We numb. We distract. But repression does not make the pain disappear. It drives it underground, where it festers, gaining strength and subtlety. It becomes the voice in our head that tells us we're not good enough, the tension in our shoulders that never relaxes, the inexplicable exhaustion after a conversation that felt fine on the surface but left us hollow underneath. What we do not allow into consciousness does not cease to exist. It controls us from the shadows. You may find yourself sabotaging the very thing you claim to desire. You want intimacy, yet you pull away the moment someone gets close. You crave peace, yet you stir conflict because it feels familiar. The contradiction is not irrational, it is symbolic. It tells us that a deeper part of us is trying to speak. And here's where transformation begins, not with judgment, but with witnessing. When we say to our fear, "I see you," we interrupt the cycle. When we turn to our shame and sit with it without trying to fix or flee, we create a crack in the armor. That crack is not weakness. It is the entry point for light. There's an ancient intelligence within us that knows how to heal, but it can only be activated through awareness. And awareness is not just mental recognition, it is emotional presence. It is letting the grief surface when it's ready, letting the rage move through the body without labeling it as wrong. This process is not linear. It is not clean. You may feel worse before you feel better, because for years you've been building dams around your pain, and now the river is beginning to flow again. It will test your patience. It will challenge your sense of identity, but it will also awaken a strength in you that you forgot you had, the strength to face yourself. And facing yourself is the most sacred act of all, because it means choosing truth over comfort, choosing wholeness over performance, choosing to live a life that is no longer controlled by the ghosts of your past. Let us not underestimate how radical this is. In a world obsessed with quick fixes, to sit with your pain is a revolutionary act. To feel, to reflect, to grieve. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are beginning to remember who you really are beneath the armor. Real healing is not loud. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly when you choose not to override the emotion, when you pause in the middle of a triggered reaction and ask, what is this really about? When you stop blaming the outside world for your inner chaos and begin to tend to the root. That root often lies in the forgotten places, the childhood moments that no one else remembers, but that shape the way you learn to love and be loved, the stories you internalized before you had words for them, the ache of not being chosen, the rage of not being protected, the grief of being alone in your fear. These are not just memories. They are living energies within you, asking to be seen. So, how do we break the cycle? We stop running, we stop explaining, we stop blaming, and we begin to listen. You may sit in meditation and feel nothing. That's okay. You may journal and find only confusion. That's okay. You may try to cry and feel numb. That too is okay. The point is not to force a breakthrough. The point is to keep showing up with gentleness, with honesty, with a willingness to feel whatever is true. Because the day will come when something shifts, when the shame that once silenced you becomes a story you can hold without trembling, when the fear that once dictated your every move becomes a familiar visitor, not a tyrant. When the relationship you once clung to out of desperation is released with love because you no longer need it to fill the void. This is the quiet miracle of turning inward. The cycle of pain ends when we stop trying to escape and start trying to understand. It ends when we realize that the part of us we feared the most, the wounded child, the angry protector, the aching heart, is not our enemy. It is our gateway to freedom. And freedom is not found in fixing ourselves. It is found in reclaiming every lost piece of who we are. So we listen, we feel, we witness, and we begin at last to heal. There is a paradox that lives at the very heart of the human experience, one so profound that most overlook it in their hurry to be free of pain. It is this: what most breaks us also most reveals us. The very suffering we resist with all our strength holds within it the blueprint of our deepest becoming. What shatters the ego does not destroy the soul. It strips it bare, and in that bareness something ancient and sacred is remembered. People often seek to move past their wounds as though healing means forgetting. They want closure, relief, distance. But true healing is not a flight upward. It is a descent. Not a rising above the wound, but a sinking into it, as one would enter a sacred cave. It is here, in the dark recesses of our grief, rage, loneliness, and fear, that the soul speaks, and it does not speak in the language of surface fixes. It speaks in symbols, in silence, in dreams, in aching longings that seem to make no sense, until they do. Those who have suffered know this terrain. A man who has faced the death of a child does not walk the earth the same way as before. A woman who has lived through betrayal does not trust blindly, but neither does she settle for shallow love. These are not marks of damage. They are marks of depth. To suffer is to be initiated into a mystery that the intellect cannot explain. It is to be humbled by forces beyond control, and in that humbling, to become more human. The transformation does not happen all at once. At first, suffering crushes, it disorients, it turns the world gray. The woman who lost her husband didn't choose her grief. She was swallowed by it. For months, she drifted between memories and silence. The world felt unreal. People offered kind words, but they could not reach her. There was no consolation for what had been taken. But she began to write, not because she believed it would help, but because something inside her needed to speak. She wrote letters to him, not for a book, not for healing, but because her soul demanded connection. These letters were raw, fragmented, singular, divine, and full of longing and fury and tenderness. She didn't care if they made sense. She wrote them like prayers to the void. Over time, something shifted. The act of writing, of bringing the formless pain into words, created a container. The grief did not leave her, but it found rhythm. It began to shape her instead of destroy her. The letters became a book. And when she released that book into the world, she discovered that her pain was not just hers, it was ours. Thousands wrote to her, thanked her, told her they too had felt this weight, and that her words had made them feel less alone. This is what it means to descend and find gold, not the kind of gold that buys happiness, but the kind that gives meaning. She had not escaped her suffering, she had transfigured it. The pain was no longer just a loss, it had become a bridge, a torch, a song in the darkness for others to follow. So often we try to bypass this journey. We tell ourselves we should be over it by now. We look for distractions, for quick answers, for affirmations that everything is okay. But something deep within us knows when we are lying to ourselves. The wound whispers. It haunts our dreams. It shows up in our relationships. It tightens our chest when we hear certain songs or smell certain places. We think we've buried it, but it is alive. It will not die until we acknowledge it. There is wisdom in the ancient myths that speak of descent. Inanna descending into the underworld, and God sits smoking, descent into the underworld. Orpheus walking into Hades for love. The descent is not a metaphor, it is a necessity. We must go into the places we fear the most, not to conquer them, but to meet the forgotten parts of ourselves that dwell there. When suffering is made conscious, it becomes sacred, not in the romantic sense, not as something we wish for, but in the sense that it becomes meaningful. It invites us into relationship with our soul. And the soul does not speak in timelines or checklists. It asks only for presence, to be felt, to be honored. Pain that is denied becomes poison. Pain that is faced becomes power. Not the power of dominance, but the power of truth. There is a strength that comes from knowing you have walked through hell and still chosen to love, still chosen to create, still chosen to show up. There is no formula for this. No guaranteed outcome. Some days you will feel like you are drowning again. Some days you will want to go numb. But each time you choose to stay with yourself, to breathe through the ache rather than run, you become more whole. This wholeness does not mean perfection. It means that your sorrow is not ashamed to be hidden, but a river that runs through you, nourishing your depth. It means that your anger is not something to fear, but a guardian of your boundaries. It means that your heartbreak is not a flaw, but a gateway to deeper love. To descend into pain is not a detour, it is the path. And on this path you will discover aspects of yourself you never knew existed. The part of you that can hold another in their grief without fixing, the part that can endure silence without panicking, the part that finds beauty in imperfection, tenderness in scars. The world does not need more people who are pretending to be okay. It needs people who have dared to break open and find wisdom inside the fracture, people who have descended into their own darkness and returned with gifts. These are the people who carry presence whose words land like medicine, whose eyes see within us a vast, untapped well of resilience. But it is not activated by pushing away what hurts. It is activated by turning toward it with curiosity, with reverence, with the knowing that pain, too, is a portal. The woman who wrote those letters did not expect healing, but she met herself in the process. And what she found was not just grief, but grace, not just loss, but light. And it is this light, born of darkness, that illuminates the way for others. We do not heal by rising above our wounds. We heal by going through them and discovering that what tried to break us in the end shaped us into something more real, more human, more whole. Too often, without realizing it, we become fused with our pain, not just in fleeting moments of suffering, but as a deeper identity. We stop seeing our hurt as an experience and begin to see it as who we are. The line between I feel broken and I am broken blurs, and somewhere in that blur, we lose the spaciousness of the soul. This fusion happens quietly, often in childhood when the pain is too overwhelming for a young psyche to process. A parent's neglect becomes a whisper, I'm not worth loving. A teacher's ridicule becomes a conclusion, I'm not intelligent. A betrayal becomes a binding truth, I am unsafe in love. These are not rational assessments. We are not born thinking this way. These are interpretations created in the fog of pain, woven into the unconscious and later mistaken for truth. And so we carry these stories into adulthood. I always mess it up. I'm too much. I'm not enough. We say these words not as passing complaints, but as definitions of self. Yet, these are not truths. They are narratives born from unprocessed hurt. They take on power not because they are accurate, but because they are believed. But the truth is deeper. Beneath the story of the wound lies the one who has seen it all, the one who has endured it all, the one who is still here. You are not your pain. You are the one who can witness it. This witnessing self is not reactive. It does not argue with the emotions or try to suppress them. Witnessing it makes it doesn't matter. We are not the emotions. They are not who we are. It watches with patience. It sees without judging. It waits for the pain to speak in its own time. It understands that emotions are not problems to solve, but messengers to listen to. Imagine, if you will, the self as a house. Within this house are many rooms, some warm and well lit, others abandoned, locked away. Pain often lives in those forgotten rooms. It doesn't define the house. It doesn't own the house. But if ignored, it begins to seep through the walls. You may find it in your relationships, in your compulsions, in the anxiety that wakes you at 3 a.m. You may not know where it's coming from, but it's always pointing to something. To heal is to open the door, not to fix the room immediately, not to scrub it clean with urgency, but to enter it with presence, to stand there with the dust and the echoes and say, you belong here too. This is not detachment. It is sacred inclusion. It is love. Too many spiritual paths have taught detachment as a way of numbing. You are not your body. You are not your emotions. But what use is it to disown what is asking to be held? Detachment that denies the emotional realm is not freedom. It is avoidance dressed in robes. The kind of presence that liberates does not look away from grief or fear or shame. It turns toward them gently, like a mother turning toward a child who has been hiding under the bed, trembling, not to scold, not to send away, but to sit beside, to listen, to hold. There is a quiet strength in this, a power not born from force, but from inclusion. When you stop running from your sadness, it softens. When you stop judging your anger, it begins to reveal its root. When you stop identifying with shame, It starts to dissolve, not because these emotions are wrong, but because they have finally been received. The mind may ask, but what do I do with the pain? And the answer is nothing at first. You be with it. You breathe with it. You feel it in the body. You resist the urge to explain it away. You allow it to be what it is: energy, memory, longing, without turning it into an identity. Something begins to shift when you do this. It is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A bit more space inside, a softer edge to the inner critic, a sense that you are not drowning anymore, even though the water is still around you. This is the birth of the inner witness, the part of you that is not consumed by emotion, but that can compassionately hold it. This capacity to hold is the beginning of real healing. When the self becomes large enough to contain the wound no longer defines the self. And this expansion is not theoretical, it is felt. You begin to notice it in how you respond when you're hurt. You catch yourself before reacting. You speak to yourself more gently. You stop needing others to validate you as proof of your worth. This doesn't mean the pain disappears. Old wounds may still ache. Triggers may still surface, but they are no longer driving the car. You are, and you are choosing to drive with your whole self on board. Not just the polished parts, but the fractured, aching, still healing parts too. There's a kind of dignity in this integration, a wholeness that doesn't come from perfection, but from intimacy with your own depths. You realize that you are not here to be flawless, you are here to be true. And truth includes contradiction. It includes vulnerability. It includes the courage to admit, yes, I have been hurt, and yes, I am still whole. This is the soul's work, to remember what the pain made us forget, to reclaim the parts of ourselves we exiled in order to survive, to become large enough to love what once felt unlovable. And love in this context is not sentimental, it is fierce. It says, I will not abandon myself. Not now, not again. From this place, transformation becomes possible, not because we push the wound away, but because we welcome it home. And in that sacred reunion, the wound becomes a portal. Through it, we touch something timeless. The calm presence that was always there, waiting beneath the surface of the story, whispering, you are not the pain. You are the one who can hold it. This is a truth often seen in families, though it is rarely spoken aloud. Pain that is not healed does not disappear. It is passed down. Generation to generation, it flows like an underground river, shaping the soil of a family's story. A father who never learned to express anger safely becomes rigid, controlling, not out of cruelty, but because somewhere long ago, expressing emotion was unsafe. A mother who is shamed for her desires carries that shame silently, but it shows itself in her over-criticism, her self-sacrifice, her inability to celebrate her own daughter's light. This inheritance is not given through words or rituals. It is handed down through silence, glances, unspoken rules. Children learn not just from what is said, but from what is felt. They learn when to speak and when to shrink. And so, I guess in my life, there's the same secrets in my house that are shared by my children. And we all learn not just from what is said, but from what is felt. They learn when to speak and when to shrink. And so I think you might say that it's in a small way, it's when to cry and when to smile through the pain. They learn which parts of themselves are welcome and which must be hidden away. The family becomes a theater where unfinished emotions play out again and again. A mother's suppressed shame becomes her daughter's body image struggle. A father's buried rage becomes his son's fear of confrontation. A grandfather's unprocessed grief becomes the family's compulsive busyness. Anything to avoid stillness where sorrow might surface. And none of it is intentional. No one wakes up and decides to pass down pain. It happens because the wound left unattended finds another voice. If it cannot speak through one generation, it will speak through the next. But this is not a story of blame. It is a story of blindness. People do not pass on pain because they are bad. They do it because they are unhealed. And they are unhealed because somewhere along the line, no one taught them how to sit with pain, how to honor it, how to feel it without collapsing into it or running from it. And so they did the only thing they knew, survive. And surviving often means suppressing. Yet what is suppressed is never silent for long. Emotional pain that is not metabolized doesn't simply vanish, it leaks. It shows up in sarcasm that cuts deeper than intended, that inside, in controlling behavior masked as just trying to help, in perfectionism that cloaks a terror of not being enough, in addictions that offer escape from feelings too large to bear. And still, beneath all this, the original wound waits, not to punish, but to be held, not to destroy, but to be transformed. The wound is not the enemy, it is the doorway. And so a reckoning comes, sometimes softly, sometimes as a storm, a moment where someone in the family awakens. They see the pattern, not just in themselves, but across the bloodline. They notice how the same things keep repeating: betrayal, abandonment, silence, rage, and instead of turning away, they choose to turn toward it. This person becomes the sacred disruptor, the one who says, "It ends with me," not out of ego, but from a deep soul knowing that something must change. And change begins always with the one who is willing to feel. To be the first in your lineage to heal is no small task. It can feel isolating. You may be met with resistance. Families often cling tightly to their stories, even painful ones, because those stories have kept them alive. To step outside the role is to challenge the system. To feel fully is to break agreements that were never spoken, but deeply understood. You may be called dramatic, sensitive, rebellious, but underneath those labels is the truth. You are courageous. You are stepping into a role few choose willingly, the alchemist of the ancestral pain. And the work is not theoretical. It is felt in the body. The tightness in your chest when you speak your truth for the first time. The tremble in your voice when you say no where you were taught to comply. The grief that floods your heart when you allow yourself to mourn what you never received. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the chain is breaking. And science, now, catches up with what the soul has always known. Studies in epigenetics show that trauma can alter gene expression. Fear, shame, and stress can shape not only our behaviors, but the biological instructions passed on to the next generation. But this research also holds a promise. Healing, too, leaves an imprint. Conscious attention, self-compassion, emotional presence. These things reshape not only the psyche, but the very biology of future generations. So when you choose to do the work, to feel what was unfelt, to speak what was silenced, to love what was unloved, you are not just changing your life, you are changing the future. You are lighting a candle in a long hallway of darkness, and those who come after you, even if they never know your name, will walk a little more freely because you chose to face what others could not. It may not feel noble. Some days it will feel like too much. You will question the point of it all. You will long to go back to sleep. But something in you will keep calling you forward because the soul knows that freedom is not found in pretending the wound isn't there. It is found in walking through it, hands open, heart trembling, and saying, "I will not pass this on." And in time, you will see the change. A niece who grows up confident in her voice, a nephew who cries freely and isn't shamed for it, a daughter who loves herself in ways her mother never could, a son who chooses tenderness over control. These are the echoes of your choice. To be the one who heals is to become the medicine the family never knew it needed. And while you may never receive a thank you from the past, you will feel the future whispering it in every breath of freedom they take. We live in a world that has made escape an art form. Everywhere we turn, there is something offering relief from the weight of being human. We scroll past discomfort, drown sorrow in dopamine, and mistake productivity for peace. Even our healing is rushed. Another task on the to-do list, another method to fix what hurts. But underneath all of it, the truth remains. Emotional pain cannot be outrun. It is not a malfunction of the self. It is not an enemy. It is a summons, and this summons is to presence. Pain does not ask for solutions. It asks to be witnessed. It wants to be felt, not fixed. But we fear that if we let it in, even for a moment, it will consume us. So we armor up. We analyze instead of feel. We distract instead of listen. We try to transcend before we've even descended. And yet, the pain waits. Participants were asked to sit in silence with their thoughts for just 15 minutes. No phone, no music, no talking, just themselves. Many found it so unbearable that they opted to administer electric shocks to themselves rather than endure the stillness. That is how terrifying it is to be fully present with our inner world, not because we are weak, but because we have been conditioned to believe that discomfort is a problem, that silence is empty, that stillness is wasted. But the soul thrives in silence. The psyche needs stillness to reveal itself. When we finally stop running and bring our awareness fully into the moment, not as an idea, but as a living, breathing practice, something begins to shift. The breath returns. The body softens. The fear no longer grows. In the absence of distraction, we begin to hear what has long been whispering beneath the surface. This is not an escape into calm. It is a confrontation with truth. Presence is not the absence of pain. It is the space that holds it. And in this space, something ancient awakens. Not the roles we perform, not the masks we wear, not the inner critic that narrates our worth, but something deeper, something older, something unbreakable. That something is essence. Essence does not argue with reality. It meets it. It breathes with it. It sits beside grief as one would sit with a dying friend, not to change them, but simply to be there. Essence has no need to rush because it does not fear pain. It knows pain as part of the great unfolding. It knows suffering as a sacred teacher. It sees our wounds not as flaws, but as invitations to become more real. And yet presence is not passive. It is not a retreat from life. It is an act of radical courage. To stay with what we want most to abandon. To look at the emotion we've buried and say, I see you. I will not leave you. This is not weakness. This is strength in its purest form. We were not taught how to do this. Most of us inherited the belief that pain should be managed, solved, or ignored. We learned to cope, but not to listen. We learned to suppress, but not to sit. And so we developed a culture that moves fast and feels little. A world where stillness is strange and silence is feared. But beneath all the noise, our pain waits for us. So, not to punish, but to be integrated, to be woven into the tapestry of who we are, because pain is not the opposite of life. It is part of life. And when we stop resisting it, we begin to access the wisdom it holds. In presence, the stories begin to unravel. The story that says, I am unworthy. The story that says, I must be perfect to be loved. The story that says, I am alone in this. These are not truths. They are echoes of old wounds passed down through generations and cemented by repetition. But when we sit with them, not to argue, but to understand, they lose their grip. This is why the cycle of suffering breaks in presence, not because we fix the pain, but because we stop feeding it. The loop of fear, shame, and self-abandonment can only survive in resistance. It cannot survive in awareness. Awareness brings air into the room, makes space, and in that space, the self begins to breathe again. And when the self breathes, the soul begins to sing again. This song is not loud. It is not proud. It does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives like a breeze through an open window, gentle, undeniable. You feel it in the quiet confidence that replaces the need to prove. You feel it in the softening of judgment, both toward yourself and others. And the song says, and there's a gentleness to it. The song says you are okay. And the song says you feel it in the way you begin to live, no longer to escape but to embody. Presence teaches us that we do not need to be healed to be whole. We need only to be here, to bring the totality of who we are, wounded, weary, longing, into the now. And in doing so, we remember that nothing within us is too much, no emotion too dark, no memory too painful. The self, when rooted in presence, can hold it all. The paradox is that we spend our lives running from the very thing that would save us. And the salvation is not grand. It is not in a new belief system, a new relationship, a new role. It is in this breath, this moment, this willingness to sit with what is without turning away. And so we return again and again to presence, not as a strategy, but as a way of being. We breathe, we feel, we listen, and in that listening, we reclaim the parts of ourselves we once abandoned in the rush to be okay. The world may still tell us to escape, to numb, to keep moving, but if you are reading this, if something in you has awakened, you are being called to stay, not to fix, not to fight, just to stay. And in staying, you will discover that the very thing you feared would break you is the thing that makes you whole.